Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctorate student and I make videos about real life applications to psychology, so please hit like and subscribe if that's something you're interested in. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the situation with August Alsina, Jada Pinkett-Smith, and Will Smith that's been coming out in the media recently. Now, before we get started, I want to highlight the importance of being sensitive when discussing this topic because, as you may or may not know, usually on this channel I focus on fictional characters, specifically with the purpose of not causing harm to any real-life people. But these are real-life people involved, not fictional characters, so let's just be mindful when making any sorts of comments not to say anything that might be perceived as insulting. And please, no hate, no harassment will be tolerated. Also, I want to make it very clear that I'm not diagnosing anyone in this video, simply speculating about the contents of the two interviews that I observed, based on my own psychological knowledge as well as my personal perspective, because they are very linked together. So if you don't know the situation, here's a brief overview. So recently, August Alsina had an interview in which he admitted to a few years ago having a relationship with Jada Pinkett-Smith. Since then, Jada and Will Smith came out with their own interview in which they responded to his original interview. And I'm going to be discussing each of these interviews step by step, specifically looking at the content of what people said, as well as some behavioral observations like body language. And then at the end, I'll wrap it up with some red flags and some considerations of how you can use this knowledge in your life. So let's get started with August's interview first. So when the question is posed about whether or not he ever had a relationship with Jada Smith, he says that he doesn't like his character questioned, which suggests to me that there are people that suggested maybe he is a homewrecker and that he's kind of trying to set the record straight in this way and clear his name. He says, "I actually sat down and had a conversation with Will, and Will gave me his blessing." But in the later interview by Will and Jada, Will actually denies ever giving him his blessing. But assuming that he did sit down with August and have a conversation about the relationship, which Will didn't deny, then this would mean that Will was conscious of the relationship. He knew that it was happening. Then August talks about how he gave himself to the relationship with Jada for years, how he has a lot of love for her, how he truly devoted himself to her. He says so much that I can die right now and be okay knowing I truly loved a person. So it seems like what he experienced was a very deep love, and he feels emotions very deeply in general. And it seems like his relationship with Jada was very important to him, which will be important considering the second interview in which we kind of see Jada and Will laughing about the relationship. At one point he says, "It almost killed me, it broke me down." So not only does he feel very intense love, but he also feels very intense pain. So my overall impressions of this interview, August seems like a man who feels things very deeply, like I mentioned, who maybe experienced love with Jada that he had never experienced before, and that he was extremely wounded by the relationship in some form or another. One thing I want to mention is it's okay to feel bad for August, it's okay to feel for him, but I would urge you, when you're in a situation where you're judging a homewrecker or someone who's dating someone who's still married or in a relationship, to extend the same compassion to them even if they're not male. Because a lot of times we see this with female homewreckers, and the go-to is, calling them a homewrecker, calling them a slut whore, demeaning them. And when it's a man in that position, people seem much more compassionate, much more empathic, and willing to understand how that relationship hurt him. So that's just something that I want to point out for future reference. So now let's go into the interview by Jada and Will. And this was, of course, in response to August's interview, and it's just the two of them kind of sitting. Will is kind of asking most of the questions to Jada. She's the one narrating most of the story, but they are also asking each other, so it's kind of a co-interview. They kind of start out with Will providing an explanation as to why they're making this response interview, and it seems like it's to stop the press from speaking for them, because obviously the press is calling Will things like a simp and that they were in an open marriage, which are rumors that have existed for years to my knowledge, and people saying that he has responded to these allegations when in fact he hadn't yet. So I definitely understand this reasoning that you would want to speak for yourself, to not let other people, specifically strangers who are journalists and don't have your best interests at heart, to speak for you. And I can only speculate, but I would imagine that part of Will speaking up is also embarrassment and possible humiliation about this becoming public, and him wanting to own up to the fact that he took Jada back and the fact that they're together and the relationship is strong and happy now. So then Will kind of asks Jada to tell the story of what happened, and she starts by saying that 4.5 years ago she started a friendship with August, and she says started with him just needing some help, me wanting to help with his mental state. He was really sick. So it's interesting because she uses the word sick, which normally people associate these days with physical sickness. And I completely agree that mental illness is also a type of sickness, but I think it's kind of interesting that she's using it in this way, almost as if to make people think that she's referring to physical sickness, and then they realize, oh no, she's actually talking about his mental state, and kind of almost give this impression that she's enlightened about understanding that mental illness is also a type of sickness, while at the same time completely discrediting his validity and his credibility by saying that he was not, in a mental state to be speaking about the situation. Because that is the implication underlying. It's that he's not a well person, or that he wasn't a well person, which of course has the implication that maybe he's not a well person now, and maybe this is why he's speaking out. And what's underlying that is the assumption that we shouldn't take everything he says seriously. And his mental health struggles could have absolutely played an important role in their relationship. That is not for me to say, I'm sure they did. But the thing is, they're not relevant to this conversation. They're not really relevant to any of the story that she says. So for her to bring up his mental illness in this context feels a little bit like the point is just to discredit his credibility. And I do wonder about how wise is it to bring up someone's mental health struggles publicly. It's not a very kind thing to bring up on a public platform. Certainly, if you want to talk about your own mental health struggles, that's fine. But to bring up someone else's on such a public platform doesn't feel right to me. Especially when you are using this to, discuss your own behavior and your own mistakes, and when the person who you are discussing is clearly in a great deal of pain. That just doesn't sit well with me. So then we hear Will saying that when they went through a breakup, I was done with you. And Jada says, yeah, you kicked me to the curb. And they broke up, and they make it seem like it seemed like they thought it was going to be forever. It didn't feel like a break, it felt like a break up, in order to figure out how to make themselves happy as individuals. And there's a lot of very categorical language such as this throughout the interview. For example, later on in the interview, Will says, because I wasn't sure I was ever going to speak to you again, and the fact that I'm speaking to you again is a miracle, which suggests that he was definitely not okay with something. He was angry and resentful over something Jada did, although it's not clear to me whether this is the relationship with August itself or whether it's completely unrelated. This language does paint a picture, though, of Will being very angry, and it's unclear to me whether Jada's friendship turned relationship with August was part of the reason or the entire reason why they broke up in the first place. That is very much not clear here. So then Jada brings up this word entanglement. She says she got into a different kind of entanglement with August. And she keeps repeating the word entanglement even after Will asks her to specify exactly what happened. And he starts to kind of smile a little bit while her face is pretty expressionless throughout this. But Will calls her out. He says, an entanglement, a relationship. So he calls her out on her very vague vocabulary, which I was kind of surprised to see in a public interview, but I'm also glad that he did, because entanglement is such a word that I've never heard used to describe a relationship or an affair before. And I think it's kind of problematic that it is such a word that is not really characterizing what exactly she's describing. I think her use of this language was very intentional, and I think that it's a form of deflecting responsibility. I also noticed that Jada's wearing a very strong poker face throughout this, even while she's saying the word entanglement. Even after Will calls her out, her face is not changing, which to me suggests that she knows exactly what she's doing. Because how would it look if, for instance, someone said this? I got myself in an entanglement versus I was in an entanglement. The first one shows a lot more guilt, a lot more remorse, some stuttering. Definitely shows that that person feels guilty or feels like they're lying about something. Whereas the second one, which is more of an accurate depiction of what she sounded like, shows that the person is either very in control of their expressions or they're not really sorry. And I can only speculate about which one of these it is. It could very possibly be both, but I have no idea of actually knowing. And then Jada wants to clarify that Will never gave permission for her to have this relationship with August. And Will asks her what she was looking for, and she says, I just wanted to feel good. And of course, this makes sense. This is usually what drives people into relationships and into affairs, is to want to feel good, to want to feel wanted, to want to feel physically good, to want to feel like you're in something new and exciting and that the other person wants you. And Will then says, I feel like the husband at the press conference in which you tell the world about your transgressions, which is very honest of him, and obviously it's a bit humorous as well. But it definitely reflects some level of embarrassment and humiliation about being put in this situation and having to do this publicly. And it also shows that he's sticking by her, just like politicians' spouses do when politicians get in hot waters. A lot of times the spouse is right there by their side, sticking through thick and thin. So then Jada says that time was important for her facing her own emotional immaturity and insecurity, which is the one and only real responsibility that I hear her taking throughout this. And it is, again, purposefully vague. So it's much easier for someone to say to you, you know what, I was emotionally immature, I grew up since then, I'm really sorry for what I did to you, as opposed to, I'm really sorry, I took you for granted, I didn't tell you how much you meant to me, I put work over you, I talked shit about you to my friends. All these things are specific. They reflect that the person knows what they're taking responsibility for. So for someone to just say, sorry, I was immature, that's taking responsibility at really the most superficial level possible. Then she talks about how August was the one who decided to break off all contact with her and that she hasn't spoken with him since. And then she says it's weird that this is coming out now. And she and Will talk a little bit about that. And the implication here is that it's strange for him to bring this up out of the blue and almost like it's kind of inconvenient for him to be bringing it up now. And I imagine it was important for her to clarify this because August's interview did make it seem like he was very deeply hurt by something that she did. So in this way, she's letting the record straight that he was the one that decided to break off the relationship. And of course, this doesn't mean that maybe he wasn't hurt, because a lot of people do leave relationships because they're hurt. Jada then says it happened so long ago, while Will is talking about why they're laughing about it now. And I thought this was a little bit of a red flag because she was talking over him while she said it happened so long ago. So she's not only talking over her partner while he's trying to express his feelings, but she's also minimizing the impact of her actions by saying like, well, it's so long ago that there's so much distance between what happened then and where we are now. At certain points, I did notice that Will looked almost tearful. And maybe this is just my own personal perception. I don't know him personally, so I don't know his facial expressions all that well. But I did get the sense that he was under a great deal of discomfort and pain. And then at one point, Jada says, I don't think it's about getting anybody back. And Will says, no, for me it is. And then she calls that a petty comment, and they laugh about it. But what I noticed about this interaction was that, first of all, she's speaking for him. Second of all, he's assertive enough to correct her. And third, she considers his resentment petty. So then they kind of wrap up on the note that they've been together 25 years and that they say, we ride together, we die together, which suggests alliance, unity. Jada says, we really have gotten to that place of unconditional love. Will reminds her that in their first year of marriage, he told her that he was going to stick with her through anything, and she admits that she didn't believe it. She says, I didn't know if you would be willing to find that deep capacity to love me, which is an interesting thing to say, because I do think it sounds a little bit condescending to say, you know, I didn't know that you had that depth to love someone so unconditionally. So that was kind of a strange phrase in my opinion. And then of course they end on a very unified tone. I don't remember if they fist bumped each other or something like that. And then there are a few more things that I want to talk about just general impressions of this interview. So they laugh a lot during this interview, which suggests, an alliance and sticking through thick and thin and kind of making light of difficult things from the past. But at the same time, it's almost like putting a band-aid over something that's broken and that needs attention. And I get the sense that they laugh a lot to dilute the discomfort of the situation, or even to make it seem like they're okay to the audience when they are discussing such serious topics. Obviously, they don't want the world to perceive their relationship as shaky. But clear resentment still exists, and to laugh over things like one person perceiving the other's comment as petty, it's like, haha, that was so petty, but you're not really acknowledging the resentment and the pain underneath that comment. You're just kind of laughing about it and not addressing what's underlying that laughter. And also, Jada talks a lot throughout this interview about healing. She says it's healing that needs to happen. She talks about how when they were broken up, you and I were going through a process of healing. Her desire to heal has a lot to do with codependency and how she's drawn to people who need help. And she says again, I was able to do some real healing. And the use of this word doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because, first of all, she's talking about two different things. She's talking about them healing as individuals apart, not in their marriage. And also she's talking about her need to heal other people, so a kind of codependency. And so we really need to distinguish between those two. It seems like she's conflating her need to take time apart from her husband with her relationship with August. And also using language like healing suggests kind of this morality. It suggests like being a healer, being someone who wants to do good. And in this context where we're talking about a lot of people's feelings getting hurt, I think that it's a little bit tone deaf because you're calling yourself a healer while completely disregarding the feelings that you hurt. So some final thoughts and just wrapping up what we can learn from this interaction in these two interviews. First of all, I really want to drive this home that people who are in relationships with married individuals do go through a lot of pain usually. So don't just call them a homewrecker and act like they're doing something horrible when hearing their stories. They're human too. And instead, I would encourage you to examine, why are you dehumanizing them in that moment? Is it because you were once cheated on and you're projecting that hurt onto other people and that anger? Also, I want to just highlight the red flags that I noticed. So be cautious of the following red flags. People who purposefully use vague language to deflect responsibility. People who gaslight others and bring up reasons to discredit someone's credibility when trying to share their side of the story. People who use language like healing, which gives this kind of false sense of enlightenment almost, and growth without actually acknowledging the specific mistakes that they made. Also, be careful about using laughter as a band-aid. Laughter can absolutely be something that has a place in a relationship to strengthen and unify the relationship, but make sure that it's not just a way of ignoring the issues that exist. So while these interviews suggest that the rumors that Jada and Will Smith had an open marriage are false, I still kind of wanted to make a video on the psychology of polyamory and what psychology has to say on it. What are the particular difficulties that people face when in an open relationship or open marriage, and does it work out? What are the things that make them not work out? So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know in the comments down below and any specific questions that you might have about that. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.